Hello, everyone, and welcome to another educational session of New Brain Nutrition. We are funded by the European Union Horizon 2020 research program, and we're very happy to bring this session to you. Today, we're talking about Mind Your Microbiome, and this is presented by Clara Belzer, PhD. She's an associate professor of microbiology at Wageningen University and Research Center. And here is Dr. Belzer and myself. Dr. Belzer is the microbiologist on our project, and we're very happy to have her with us today to talk about the microbiome, how it gets started in the body, and how it matures. So, Clara, why don't you take it away, and we'll get this going.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. So welcome to this lecture about Mind Your Microbiome, which is about how the gut-brain axis can actually be influenced by microbes. So I think you might be familiar with Pavlov. He was actually a pioneer in exploring the gut-brain axis. Already in the 1900s, he did experiments to find out more about what is the connection between gut and brain. As an example, he took a dog, and what he saw is that when he presented food to the dog, this dog started to produce saliva. And in this saliva, there are already enzymes to digest his food. So the brain was seeing and smelling food, and as a result, the gut started to produce already enzymes to digest the food that would be coming. What he did next was to, every time that the dog was presented with food, he would ring a bell. And after a while, instead of presenting food and ringing a bell, Pavlov would only ring the bell. And this would result in saliva production by the dog. So the brain did not see or smell food, but being trained by this bell, the gut started to be stimulated, producing enzymes that are supposed to be working to digest food that is coming. So in that initial experiments, he already showed that there's a connection between the brain and the gut. So in this lecture of today, I want to tell you more about this gut-brain axis, taking the microbiome into account. And what I also want to do, I want to talk about how healthy development in early life is involved in this gut-brain axis. So what we will talk about is how the microbiome is established in early life, how the microbiome development is affected by nutrition, how brain development is affected by nutrition and the microbiome. I want to discuss if the gut microbiome is involved in neurodevelopmental disorders. And finally, I want to talk about how nutrition can be used to modulate the microbiome and in that way improve brain development. So let's start at the very beginning, birth. As a microbiologist, I explain birth as one big contact with the microbial world. Inside of the womb, there's an almost sterile environment. And only after birth, all the microbes that are present in this world are presented to you. And these are the microbes that will end up to colonize your intestinal tract. The first microbes that you encounter come from your mother. So you can consider birth as one big microbiota transplant from your mother's birth canal. What we know from research is that when you are born naturally, that indeed the first microbes that colonize your intestinal tract come from your mother's lower body. However, we also know that when you're born through cesarean section, the first microbes that colonize your intestinal tract come from the skin of your mother and that of other caretakers as well. So the pioneer species that start colonizing your gut are different depending on your way of birth. What we also know from research is that infants that are born with cesarean section are predisposed to the development of allergies and asthma, for example. And what we also know is that premature infants that have a very different way of birth and a very different start of life, which is correlated to a very different microbiota development, are more susceptible to infections and they have more often insufficient energy uptake.
Clara, so you're born with a microbiome, but does this microbiome change over time? In other words, if you're born by cesarean, can you overcome the microbiome that you were born with to, by being exposed to other things so that you're less allergic, or does that stay with you for life? Do we know?
It doesn't stay with you for life, no. Maybe I can explain it on the next slide.
Great.
So the way that you're born and the gestational age actually determine the microbes that initially colonize your body. After birth, your microbiota starts developing. And one of the most important factors that can determine the development of your intestinal microbiota is, again, nutrition. So early in life, nutrition of human babies is mostly milk. And depending on the type of milk, being either mother's milk or formula milk, we see differences in the microbiota development of an infant. However, after the introduction of solid food, this has a big influence on your microbiota because they depend on the nutrients the infant is eating. And this change in microbiota development then determines its adult microbiota stage. Adult-like microbiota stage, you do not see the differences that took place in early life events. So being either born naturally or through cesarean, being breastfed or not breastfed, those changes early in life in the microbiota are not present anymore at the age of about 6. What we also know is that nutrition is still having a big impact on your microbiota composition in adult life. So for example, if you change your food habits to one that is high in protein and fat, this means that not only your body physiology will change, but also your microbiota composition will change. And if we look even later in life, when people are becoming elderly, their food habits change, their body physiology changes, and this also results in changes in microbiota composition. So you can imagine that life-changing events such as overnutrition or malnutrition changes your microbiota, and this might be associated with development of different body physiology and different diseases. And a big factor, of course, is the influence of antibiotics on the microbiota composition.
I would imagine, too, that stress can also change your microbiota. Is that?
Yes, that's very true. And this is true in early life and also in later life. We see differences in microbiota composition for infants whose mothers have had stress during pregnancy, for example. And we also see differences in the microbiota between infants that are taken care, and this is our animal experiments, that are taken care of by their own mom or by a substitute mom.
Mm-hmm. So these microbiota are very sensitive to what's going on in your environment, aren't they?
Yes, indeed. The environment of the gut, based on nutrition, immunology, and all the things that are taking place there. They're a very responsive organ, if we can say that. So let's take the next step. If we think about mammals, they have actually found a natural way to manipulate and steer the microbiota development of their infants. So how could we visualize this? Well, I told you that through natural delivery, the mom donates some of the microbes to the infants. By breastfeeding her infant, so providing the infant and the microbes with nutrition, she actually provides also immune molecules. Even microbes that are present in breast milk are provided to the infants. In breast milk, there's also human milk oligosaccharides, and those are fibers that are not digested by the infant. They are not a source of nutrition for the infant, but they are prebiotic, so they stimulate certain microbes in the gastrointestinal tract. So the mother gives nutrition to the infant and to the microbes. She provides microbes and she provides special food to the microbes. A special confounding factor in breastfeeding your infants is that the mother provides care and attention to the infants, and this might reduce stress and might help with emotional development, for example. So this is separate from the nutritional aspect. So if we look at the breastfed microbiome, we can see that the composition is stimulated through this breast milk. So an infant that is fed through mother's milk has a different microbial composition in intestines as compared to formula-fed infants. The microbes are also shaped by the maternal immune factors that are present in the milk. And in turn, those immune factors that the mom is providing to the infants are based on her own microbes. So she provides microbes and she provides protection against pathogens through the breast milk. And then, as I mentioned before, breast milk is full with special fibers that stimulate special bacteria. And here you see a picture of one of the most special bacteria in early life, which are called bifidobacteria. And those are specialized in consuming those human milk oligosaccharides. Research has shown that those infants which have a very large proportion of those bifidobacteria in their guts as compared to adults, they are beneficial to provide energy to the infants, but also to stimulate the immune system, for example. So research has also shown that when an infant has less of those bifidobacteria in its guts in early life, this can influence the development of an infant. And it can also be associated with development of certain diseases and mostly immune disorders such as asthma and allergies, but also IBD and type 2 diabetes, for example.
So not being breastfed can increase the likelihood of these immune disorders?
Yes, that's
Wow.
what science tells us.
Uh-huh.
Interestingly, in formula, a lot of fibers are added now to stimulate especially these bifidobacteria. So not being breastfed does not automatically mean that you don't harbor these bifidobacteria anymore. So to conclude this part of the lecture, I want to summarize how the microbiota can actually improve our health. So one is they can degrade indigestible fibers. In early life, the human milk oligosaccharides. By digesting these fibers, they produce vitamins, but they also produce energy, and mostly in the form of what we call short-chain fatty acids. And those can promote growth and development. What microbes also do, they stimulate the immune system, and they can even protect against pathogens. So taken together, having the right microbes in your intestine, this microbiome can help to be healthy. So now let's switch to the development of the brain. So the first thing I want to bring to your attention is that human babies, as compared to a lot of other animals, are born prematurely when it comes to brain development. Humans have an extraordinarily large brain. This has become a problem for human mothers to actually give birth to their infants when they would have such a big head. So this paradox between the size of the mother's birth canal and the big brain of humans is solved by delivering the infants considerably premature. And this also results in the fact that human babies need a lot of attention and care for the first year of life. They are a lot more dependent than most other animal species. It also means that after birth, the human brain will double in size in the first year, and it will keep on growing to about 90% by the age of 5. Growing and development is depending on nutrition, so nutrition will have a major impact on the growth and development of the brain of human infants.
Now, this doesn't mean that the head doubles in size. It just means that the brain is growing within the skull.
Yeah, head size is a very important measure for infant growth. It's always taken along by doctor. They weight the infant, they measure the infant, and they measure the head size.
Interesting.
So it is taken along for development. So the influence of nutrition on brain development has been studied a lot. And to take it back to early life, there is an important role for human milk, mother's milk, in this brain development. Research has shown that breastfeeding has a beneficial effect on childhood cognition. So in such studies, they show that the cognition of toddlers and preschool children is a bit higher when they were breastfed early in life. This, of course, can be due to products that are present in breast milk that are not present in formula, for example. And then we can think again of immune molecules, the human milk oligosaccharides, and the microbes. But of course, you have to take into account, as I mentioned before, that not being breastfed, you have a different maternal-infant interaction in early life. And this can be a confounder for this developmental difference.
Do we know enough in science now to be able to make formula truly nourishing the way mother's milk is, or is formula still deficient?
Formula is efficient in providing the right amount of nutrients for growth, but it's deficient in a lot of things like the immune molecules and the microbes that are in there. And what we think is that very early in life, some of your body components are trained. So even though they're not present later in life, early in life, you're trained your immune system and your metabolic system by, for example, those factors that you encounter from breast milk and the microbes that are there.
Interesting.
So another example of how nutrition can influence brain development comes when we look at preterm infants. So these are actual preterm infants that are born early gestational age. They have a much greater nutritional demand. Their nutrients is always fortified by extra feed. So even breastfed is not enough to feed a premature infant. Also, those premature born infants have a much higher risk for neurodevelopmental impairments because their brain is even more immature and needs to develop more outside of the womb. What has been shown in scientific papers is that there is a beneficial effect on breast milk rather than formula feeding on the neurodevelopmental outcomes of preterm infants. What also have been shown, if we take it more to a microbiome aspect, is that breastfed infants are more protected against a very common disease that appears in preterm infants called NEC, necrotic enterocolitis.
Wow. And what are the symptoms of that?
So they have severe inflammation and infections in the gastrointestinal tract. Yeah, and I think it's the cause of death for the majority of premature infants. Wow. But having the right microbiome there can sometimes be efficient to fight against that pathogenic infection. Mm-hmm. But more research needs to be done. But for the premature infants, there's a lot of evidence how important the type of nutrition is for the development of the brain. So to make my point even a bit stronger, we can take malnutrition as an example to see what this does on development and brain development. In the prenatal period, I think you know that the mother has to be very careful with her nutrition to feed the unborn child. And it has been shown that malnutrition in the prenatal period can already impair brain development. As such, it is already advised that the moms take more folic acid, but also copper and vitamin A are important and shown to be have an effect on the formation of neural plate and neural tube of the infant.
Now, can you explain those two terms? What is neural plate and neural tube?
Yes, so those are the first bases that are laid to make the brain of the infant.
I see.
So the mother has to have sufficient nutrition to provide to the developing infant to develop actually this brain in the prenatal period. If we then look at malnutrition during infancy, there are big correlations and associations with children that are stunted. And stunted means that they're short for their age or underweight. And if this appears, this is associated with immune dysfunction and a lot of cognitive deficits. And research shows that children who became stunted before 2 years of age continued to show deficits in cognition and school achievements at measurements of 5 years of age, but even when they did measurements into adolescence. Taking this a bit further, being malnurtured, the nutrition has a big influence on the development of the microbiota. And it has been shown that those malnurtured and stunted infants have a different microbiota as compared to healthy children. And this microbiota of these undernourished infants also shows to be less beneficial for metabolic and immune health. So as an example, they took the microbiota of a malnourished infant and transferred this to a mouse. And they saw that this mouse actually started to show deficits that the malnourished infants had. So some of the symptoms were not purely based on the nutrition itself, but on the microbes that responded to this malnutrition. So the next step, of course, would be, with all this knowledge, can we manipulate through nutrition the microbiome and the behavior of individuals? We know that malnourished infants do not only have an influence of the food that is presented to them. This usually is associated also with disadvantage in socioeconomic status and less stimulative environments. However, studies have been done by changing only the food of such infants. As an example, they took children and they gave these children higher protein and energy drink to overcome the malnutrition. And they saw that those children already had higher cognitive scores at the age of 4 or 5 years. And even when they measured again, they had improved cognitive scores later in life, associated with providing them with the right nutrition. So you could imagine if protein, which is actually a source of energy for the infant itself, can have an effect on cognition, if we would on top of that stimulate the right microbes to pre and probiotics, we can have maybe an extra positive influence on the development of the infants by stimulating the immune system and the metabolic system and the growth.
Can you explain a little bit more here how this connection between the microbiome and mental health here? And in the case of, we're talking about children here receiving protein, they have higher cognitive scores. What's the connection there? How does that work?
So it is thought that the development of the brain has to do with the right nutrition. So providing enough nutrition, and the right nutrition in a sense of vitamins can be the only way to have the brain develop in a healthy way. Putting this back, what I told you previously, that microbes from a certain nutritional source can provide extra vitamins and extra energy. This can be then on top of just having to metabolize yourself the nutrients from your food, the microbes can give a little bit extra and digest it for you and provide you with the extra energy that can help you with the brain development.
Thank you.
So the information that I shared with you, I put together in this diagram. The message that I wanted to get across to you is that nutrition is very, very important for early life development of the infant, and especially the brain of the infant. Breastfeeding seems to be beneficial for this development, and it's directly correlated to neurosocial and cognitive development. But if we take the microbiome into account, which is affected by nutrition, the microbiome can give an extra boost to the development and growth of an infant by providing extra energy, extra vitamins, and metabolic and immune imprinting, and increasing the gut barrier, and in that way have an extra beneficial effect on the development and brain development of an infant. So to summarize the take-home messages of today, I told you that the microbiome is involved in a healthy early life development, that the establishment of the microbiome depends on early life events such as way of birth, type of nutrition, and the use of antibiotics. We discussed that breastfed infants have a lower chance to develop neurodevelopmental disorders. And we also discussed that brain development is affected by nutrition, but also the microbiome. The gut microbiome is associated with neurodevelopmental disorders, and maybe new nutrition advice can help to steer the microbiome in a more healthy state, and also to steer in that way the brain development part that is done through the microbiome.
So just a question here. You've really focused on early life and how this is really formative for the relationship between the gut microbiome and brain development. I'm assuming this continues into later life. Have we done research about this? Do we know how the connection between the gut microbiome and mental health is affected in adults? Does this kind of relationship continue throughout life?
Yes, it continues throughout life, but then there's a lot of different examples how the gut-brain axis can work. So one is, of course, behavioral changes, which can be connected to hormones that are produced in the gut. Another very important factor that has been measured is pain sedation, for example. How do you encounter pain? How much pain do you encounter? And in some cases, it has been shown that having a certain microbiota composition reduces inflammation and reduces even, in some cases, the pain.
Mm-hmm. And Clara, can you tell us what role you have in the Eat to Be Nice project? You're doing a very special role. So we are doing 4 different clinical trials, trialing different combinations of, food elimination for one, and then vitamins and nutrients and nutrient supplementation. What's your role in these studies?
Yes. So here I explained about how the microbiome might be involved in and how it's modulated by nutrition, and how nutrition can also be influencing the development. But of course, if we take this a step further to later life, we want to explore a lot more of the role of microbes in behavior and brain development. So in that sense, the different studies that are done now, we will look at the microbes in the gut and see how they respond to different nutritional interventions. And we will also try to correlate it to the behavior measurements that are done in the individuals that take part in these studies. So it would be interesting to see if people with a certain microbiota composition are more prone to show certain dietary behavior, for example.
Fascinating. So Clara and her team is playing a very, very important role here in our study by studying the microbiome of the people who will be going through our clinical trials to see what correlations there are with other aspects of their lives. Clara, thank you very much. We've learned today that this all starts at birth, and it's a very important relationship between the gut microbiome and brain development. And thank you so much for your expertise and your time. And we wish you the best in your studies here as we go through the Eat to Be Nice project.
Thank you. Very welcome.
Thank you, everybody, for attending. We hope this has been a good session for you, and there are other sessions to also enjoy. Again, thank you to Clara, and thank you for being here. Take care, everybody.